Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the situation in Tobago has been gaining the attention on the public, in terms of public discussion for quite a while now. In relation to what's happening, there was an emotional story done by another media house where a business owner and a mother sat basically saying she was in tears, that her shelves are empty and the people of Tobago are suffering. Juxtapose this with the statements that were made in the parliamentary chamber, where one of the members of parliament representing the people of Tobago stood up and said Tobago is fine and everything is all good and they are fine in Tobago. Well, that seems to be in stark contrast to not only what the chamber has been saying over the last year, but what the business entities are saying and what they're saying the banks are also saying in relation to commercial activities. I also don't know whether the minister saw the fact that tourist arrivals are woefully low in Tobago, and the fact is, in light of all of the strides made in terms of Caribbean tourism, Tobago has yet to see any of the benefits. The THA arrangements and talk of self-governance continue to be a carrot dangled in front of the people of Tobago. But in the end, while we play politics, the people of Tobago, are they really suffering? Or is this all just a media-created, or is this yet another shenanigan created by the media and the politicians? Well, Martin George is now in one of the more prominent seats in relation to the Tobago Chamber. He's a vice chair and now representing the interests of those in Tobago. He takes over from key personalities, including Diane Haddad. Will it be the same voice, and will they be saying the same thing? Mr. George, good morning. How are you?
Hi, good morning to Hema, and good morning Trinidad and Tobago. And just a slight correction, Diane Haddad remains part of the management team.
But you are now officially taking over.
I'm now vice chairman.
The vice chair. Now, in relation to your post and the changes in the chamber, I made the comments that over the last year, the chamber has been very vocal in relation to what is happening in Tobago. As of today, Holy Week, a couple days before the Easter vacation kicks off, is there anything to celebrate and to be grateful for today in Tobago?
Well, Hema, we always have to celebrate the feast that is Easter and the holy time that this is. But it certainly has not been any other celebration apart from that for the business community in Tobago. There are questions that still remain in relation to the TNT Express, and I would certainly like the authorities at the Trinidad and Tobago Authority to tell us exactly where is the TNT Express at this time, as we speak. Can someone go down with some television cameras down to the docks and see where exactly the TNT Express is, what work is supposedly being done on the TNT Express? Because we keep hearing scenarios and stories, and you really begin to, get wary of the fairy tales that seem to be coming from authorities in relation to these vessels. So that's the first question I would like to pose for the Port Authority. Tell us at this point in time, you don't need any ship tracking system or device. Just tell us, where is the TNT Express? What work is being done on it as we speak? I think that's the first fundamental question. The next question relates to the TNT Spirit, which is the other vessel, and we need to know when will that vessel be back in service. Give us a date, give us a definite indication that this vessel will be back in regular service, not back in service for 2 days and then you break down again and then you say you have to have it down for 2 months again. This is the mandate of the Port Authority. If you look at it, this is a statutory mandate that they have under law. I think that it is possible that persons can look towards that legislation, maybe with a view to bring in some legal action for breach of statutory duty by the persons at the Port Authority for failing in their duties in relation to the public of Trinidad and Tobago. And I say this quite clearly, Hema, this is not just a Tobago issue. We need to broaden the mandate, widen the scope. We need to get persons in Trinidad agitated about, getting the authorities to do their jobs in relation to this ferry service. Lots of Trinidadians have had to actually cancel and change their plans for the Easter vacation because they would normally come to Tobago, but because of the unreliability of the inter-island transport situation, they would have to make arrangements. Otherwise, they may go Grenada, Barbados, St. Vincent, So Tobago is losing out Trinidadians are losing out on the opportunity to have a nice, easy vacation where they could just load up their vehicles, drive over. So I want us to start, making that paradigm shift, Hema, to change it from just being a Tobago problem. Because I think what has happened is that we've painted ourselves into a corner a bit by making it purely a Tobago issue. This is a national issue. This must be front burner nationally, because basically it's almost as if, look at how, people swung in action when the Lady Young Road was blocked, and therefore you were basically cut off from access. They had to treat with that as an emergency situation. They got all the equipment, they got the bulldozers, the backhoes. In fact, the very Ministry of Works was able to go in there and resolve this. This is a national crisis.
Why is it being allowed to continue for so long, Martin? This is my question, because, I've heard you say this, I've heard Mr. Cruikshank say this, I've heard Diane Haddad preach from the mountains come straight back that something needs to be done. So I was in complete shock when I heard an MP from Tobago get up and say Tobago is fine, the people of Tobago are fine, and yet you see Liz Williams doing an article where people are in tears saying that there's no food on their shelf, that they have no idea how they will continue to live day to day. So I don't know if the MP is out of touch or we are just looking at the machinations of politicians in the parliament.
Well, I think it clearly appears to be the latter, and maybe that particular member of parliament is a fan of Greek mythology, because if you remember the story of Odysseus, where, he said, nobody is killing me. So maybe that is exactly what she was referring to when she said nobody is suffering in Tobago. So I guess by the same token, she would be proud to stand up and say nobody is representing her constituency in that regard, because that's the only way you can make any sense of the statement that was uttered. And it's not just an insult to the people of Tobago. I think it's an insult to the national community, because when you look at the role of your representative in the national parliament, you are there to represent the facts as they are. You're not there to put a political spin on things and to, give what you think to be a sugar-coated version of the truth, or your own version of what is the reality, when the people who are on the ground are clearly indicating that this is not the case. So it's either that our parliamentarians are maybe too out of touch with reality, maybe they are not suffering, clearly, so, maybe they are looking at it from that perspective, and when they look around in families and their friends and their close relations, everybody's probably doing very well for them. So clearly, if they look at it from that perspective, they can look around and say, in my family, among my friends, the parliamentarians may say nobody is suffering. But I'm not sure that's the reality. When you look on the ground, you speak to the business people, you speak to the hoteliers, when you have the government itself admitting through ETEC that the Magdalena Grande, which is the government managed property, says that they had $400 million in losses. So how then, in the face of that, could a representative from Tobago stand in our national parliament and say nobody is suffering? Is she discrediting the words of the ETEC personnel who stood before the Joint Select Committee of Parliament and gave that evidence? Come on, let's be serious about these things. You look at the tourism numbers. You look and you see that there's been a steady decline over the last, 10 years. You can see the patterns. So how could you say nobody is suffering in those circumstances? It was an absolutely callous and heartless statement, and it seemed to have no bearing or grounding in fact or reality.
Well, I share your sentiment, because I have not been to Tobago, and I don't think I will go to Tobago because of the uncertainty and the stress of getting there, and you don't know if you're going to come back. And I think a lot of people...
I am sorry to hear you say that. I would still nonetheless encourage yourself. I would encourage all my friends, and I've been doing this. I tell you, notwithstanding how grim the situation is, I always try to look at it optimistically. And I look at the fact that Caribbean Airlines, with all due credit to them, they've stepped up to the plate in terms of increasing the numbers of flights. They've made their arrangements with Leah to try to increase seat capacity. So I think they are really, trying to do basically the job of both the Caribbean Airlines and the Port Authority by trying to facilitate the movement of passengers. So I would still encourage persons, still try to check in online, try to make your bookings, still try to come to Tobago. Don't let the authorities frustrate or thwart our attempts and efforts to enjoy our country, to enjoy the beautiful Sister Isle, still I invite all Trinidadians, try to come up, try to facilitate things. I know the folks at Caribbean
Yeah, but
Airlines
Martin, come
are
up
doing
to
their
what?
best.
Let me now ask you this, because I look at the story done by another media house where business owners and the bed and breakfast entities are basically saying that they cannot get stocks, they cannot get supplies. You don't know if you have a medical emergency, if there will be, and you're breaking it down to a real level. There are just so many uncertainties where families who have young children who may have allergies, what do you go and what are you finding? And it's all well to say, let's hold on to hope. And I know that the government has also said, I think that the water taxi will be facilitating some of the fallout expected as well, because I know some arrangements have been put in place. But the arrangements, I wonder whether they have been put in place too late, and all of these hodgepodge arrangements are being put in place, but no sustainable solution. And why are we unable to find this elusive solution?
Okay, well, the thing is, I think it's because it's become mired in the politics and because the politicians have been making a mess of it for years. And I say that without any reservation whatsoever. It's clearly because they have messed up things. And of course, the Port Authority by itself has not helped things. And that in itself may be due to the political interference that has occurred with that authority over time. But what I would say, Hema, in terms of, the despair, I would say let's not despair entirely, because let's look at, for instance, Mexico. You think of places like Cancun, Acapulco, and all the other areas in Mexico where you have vibrant tourist economies, despite the fact that when you think of Mexico City itself, or Mexico as a country, demographically and holistically, it's generally not a place that you would necessarily want to go, but yet still their tourist areas are still thriving and they're doing well. You look at Jamaica. Jamaica has been recently voted as, one of the most desirable places to go to on vacation, notwithstanding its surging crime wave. So I still say, despite all the gloom and despair, I always look for the silver lining, on the cloud. And I always, in the mud, I would always look for the diamond in the rough, and let's see what we can take.
Are you holding on to hope in a hopeless place, Martin?
Well, the thing is, when you think of Rihanna's song, she says, she was looking for love in a hopeless place. And it looks like she found it. So, if she could do that, and she's been, a representative for Barbados, both, from the tourism perspective and the promotional perspective. So the same way, we can use what we have to try to promote our island, notwithstanding the despair.
Now,
the thing is, the politicians need to do their jobs.
Were you surprised? I want to ask about the Cabo Star and the stories of sabotage, because I do have to raise that as well. While I beat up on the government, and I do think that the MP was completely out of touch with the statement, the fact is that there is reason to believe that the Cabo Star is being sabotaged, and that in itself is unacceptable.
And I certainly agree, Hema, but clearly there has to be some sort of measures that are put in place to ensure that safety and security are improved on the vessel. So if it is that you recognize that, then first of all, you have to try to identify, okay, what's the source of the sabotage? Is it your crew? Is it members of the public? Is it, something that, has been planned at some higher level? So I think it's not just sufficient for the Port Authority to cry sabotage. They need to do more, because this is a vessel under your control. You are paying a whopping, sum every day in terms of US dollars, tens of thousands of US dollars every day for this vessel to service the route. So therefore, they need to ensure that their safety and security is stepped up, so that they even look at their own staff members if necessary. You look at members of the public. So while I hear the issue about the sabotage, and we say, of course, it's unacceptable, I don't accept it as a blanket excuse to say, well, look, this is why we cannot do our jobs, because then everybody can say that, and you use that as an excuse, for non-performance.
Are you surprised that the Port Authority Board still exists?
Well, I'm surprised that we've the level of woeful incompetence that has manifested itself over the years in terms of the Port Authority Board in this scenario. And as I say, it may not be that the board itself is entirely to blame, because it may be that they have been manipulated politically and that there's been political interference by the powers that be over the years. But the thing is, you see, Hema, when you are appointed to a board such as that, you are appointed really to do national duty. You're not there to do party duty or political duty. And if it means that you have to stand up to your minister, if it means you have to stand up to those who are trying to interfere, then that's your duty to the nation, because that's what you're there for. When you're put in these boards, it's a state board. That's why they call it a state board. It's not a party board or a political board. Even though you may be appointed from a political perspective, we need to have citizens who have that gumption, that testicular fortitude to stand up and speak out for Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, do they have?
And that's the biggest problem we have here.
And does our current board have that, Mr. George? Because considering, if you had to identify the biggest problem, because Tobago is so dependent on Trinidad, and I feel as though I've had this interview so many times, and I don't know why anyone doesn't understand that. The lifeblood really comes from the connectivity of both islands. And you know, I understand. I mean, I got a text saying that, hey, the problem of the falling tourism arrivals started long before the collapse of the Sea Bridge. I get that. But the problem of falling tourist arrivals is as a result of incompetence from this government, the last government, and the one before that as well. Because no one has identified Tobago and the tourism product that we have. So taking that out of the way, why does the board still exist? And how long can Tobago continue to exist under this arrangement?
Well, Hema, I think that clearly there is need for some dire and urgent intervention strategy. And the point is, there are some simple things that can be done. Take, for instance, one of the things that I have been advocating as an easy win is if the government removes and repeals the Foreign Investment Act, which has the regulation for the land license, because that has clearly proven to be a great impediment to anyone coming to invest in Tobago from abroad. So I think an immediate repeal of that, maybe you give it a 5-year window and you say, well, okay, look, after 5 years, we will re-examine it and see what we can introduce as a means of checks and balances, because you must have that in place still. But I think if you have an immediate removal of that, that certainly will send it the proper signal. It will send the right signal. There also needs to be some leadership shown by the THA in terms of they must make it clear, because I think for too many years there has been the idea or the notion or the feeling that there's been some sort of xenophobia, you know, emanating from the highest and upper echelons of that body, whereby they have created this of attitude where sometimes some foreigners have confided in me that they don't necessarily feel comfortable or welcomed in Tobago. Even some Trinidadians, some of my friends tell me sometimes they get some negative encounters. So Tobago has to start rebranding and repositioning itself in terms of that image.
Now,
we
who
have
is
to
going
start
to do
emphasizing.
Who is it, THA and self-governance? Because if you look at it, the THA in itself gets a particular percentage of our budget, and it's billions of dollars. Yet I looked at Tobago, and you see smaller islands with smaller allocations being able to take themselves up, to gather the foreign exchange, to encourage a foreign investment. So is a THA going to be the solution? I don't think they're able to handle the current budget. So I don't know if self-governance is a greater level of autonomy is really the necessary answer.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm talking about is a greater level of responsibility being displayed by them, not autonomy or self-governance at all. I'm not even venturing into that discussion at this point. I'm saying that they need to start doing their jobs in terms of their responsibilities under the 5th schedule of the THA Act. If you look at the 5th schedule, there are 32 areas of specific responsibility the THA has, and they need to start taking that leadership role seriously, because that's why they were elected to office. If it is that you are unable or unwilling to do the job, then you need to be honest with the population and say, well, look, I'm not up to this task. Let somebody else do it. But you can't sit there in a leadership position and you simply twiddling your thumbs while Rome is burning.
Do you think that's what the THA is doing, or that's what the members are part of the...
Well, essentially, Hema, let's be realistic. And, you know, I mean, this is not to cast aspersions one way or the other, you know, politically in any direction at all. But the reality is that if you look at what is happening, there's an abject absence of that leadership role, because there are so many things that they can do to try to alleviate and ameliorate the situation, and you are not seeing it done. So therefore, in that sense, I think the public perception and public opinion is going to be the judge of their performance in that regard.
Do you think the THA has failed the people of Tobago?
Well, it has certainly not functioned in the way that it was originally envisioned. It has not functioned at all in the way it was originally envisioned.
Do you think that then by giving or granting, this is my final question, by granting greater autonomy, will the affairs of the people of Tobago finally be dealt with in an equitable and proper manner by giving a current arrangement which has failed more power?
Let's put it into context this way. If in a scenario where you are getting basically a handout in the budget every year of billions of dollars every year as your statutory allocation, and you are not able to manage yourself, how then are you going to manage yourself on your own? It's like, a child, living in the parents' house, the parents are providing food, clothing, everything, shelter, everything for the child, and the child, without having any independent means of self-financing, saying, well, look, mommy and daddy are moving out tomorrow. Within less than 2 weeks, you'll be running back home. So let's be realistic and practical. So the financial independence and economic robustness that Tobago needs to develop first, I've always said, must be a precursor to any discussion at all, or any reasonable or rational discussion on the question of self-government.
Would you support greater self-government?
Self-sustain, you can't self-govern.
Would you support a greater level of autonomy and self-governance right now?
Not at all, because we are not at the point of the self-sustenance. Let's be realistic. We are not there yet at all.
I thank you so much, and I know we touched on a number of issues this morning, and I know that I'm sure you have a busy day and a very prominent attorney at law. Mr. George, thanks so much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure, Hema, and have a good morning.
Thank you, joining us via Skype there from Tobago. We take a short break, and when we come back, we look at Cal. Mariano Brown joins us on set, and I want to make this clear. This is not a political issue, and while I will hold the current government accountable for the situation because they were elected to resolve this, I think our tourism product, successive governments have failed. We have been unable to identify what we are, who we are, and how we market ourselves to the world. I don't know whether or not this current entity that is being promised can resolve the problems, and if the attitude and the level of skill that I've seen displayed by the current minister is indicative of what we can expect, then my hopes are very low. We take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more for you.